Coordination. On the pod today, we have Rene Reisberg, who is the co-founder and currently president of the Celo Foundation. Celo is a layer 1 blockchain at the center of an ecosystem of technologies that share a common mission of building a regenerative financial system that creates conditions for prosperity for everyone. Celo has been a past GreenPilled sponsor, and we did this episode with them to talk about ReFi Summer, Celo's sort of positioning in the market, how Celo funds public goods. And, I think that I'm just really interested in people who are using crypto for regenerative means. After all, this is the podcast about regenerative crypto economics. Really want to highlight the ecosystems that are funding public goods, that are building more regenerative crypto ecosystem for themselves, but also exporting that to the world. And there's been some really interesting experiments in and around Celo, and that's why I wanted to do this episode with them and with Rene. So I think it's really interesting to hear about how Rene thinks about ReFi and what are the most interesting trends in ReFi are a couple of things that we cover in this episode. And without further ado, I give you Rene from Celo. Enjoy coordination. All right, Rene, what's up?
Hey, Kevin, good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So tell us about your work with Celo. Let's start off with what is Celo and how does it support ReFi?
Absolutely. So maybe a little bit of backstory on Celo. So we've been at this for a little over 5 years, and it started out of really a series of ideas early on where we initially actually building on Ethereum, try to figure out, hey, this is really powerful technology, but how do we use it to do more good in the world? Like, how do we help someone who doesn't have access to traditional financial banking services, like have a wallet and be more included? We're thinking about UBI. We're thinking about inspired by Charles Eisenstein's writing, how could we bring sort of this financial system and this new financial system that's evolving more in sync with the environment and with societal goals that we care about. And so really it was a kind of a series of different ideas and sort of little experiments that for us made it clear, hey, there's a big opportunity here, and it all kind of points back at sort of the same infrastructure. And so we early on forked Ethereum and started building out sort of the different layers of the stack. There was everything from sort of a wallet down to the core consensus layer. Celo was the first EVM chain that launched with proof of stake. Right from the get-go, we were using some of the epoch rewards to make the chain carbon negative, but also kind of more broadly thinking about what are sort of different primitives that would help kind of bring us towards sort of this North Star of like a regenerative financial system. Now, I think really what I think we didn't foresee, I think we kind of hoped for it, but what has been sort of most surprising is how much of a community has formed, both around Celo, but also more broadly around regenerative finance, ReFi. And that's in a way led to a shift in how we, how I see my work now, how we as founders see our work. And that's really to support all the great projects that are building on and with Celo.
Yeah. So it sounds like Celo is a layer 1 proof of stake blockchain that is mobile first. I don't know if you said mobile first in there, but that's definitely something that's in my brain about Celo.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, that's, with all of these little experiments, it was very clear, like most people out there in the world are not accessing the internet on a computer, right, on a desktop, but they're on a phone, on a smartphone. There's more than 6 billion subscribers out there, and it was clear to us anything that we do has to really work on that little device that everyone carries. And so a lot of work went into thinking about how to make that experience better. And I mean, some of the more well-known things about Celo are, for example, the smart-based ultralight client that allows to sync with the chain from say like a very simple phone with very little bandwidth. But also other form factors, for example, allowing tokens to be whitelisted to pay for gas. Which, if you're on a mobile device and you have a simple wallet, and if I want to send you a stable coin, I can simply do that and pay the fees in that stable coin. That's a huge improvement in terms of permissionless UI. Let's call it that, because obviously you could just fund it too, but to over someone having to then also have a second token, right, to do that. So there's a bunch of things that when we say mobile first really come sort of with the mindset of, okay, how do we make a lot of these great innovations that we've seen in Web3 work on sort of that limited form factor.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the fact that it's mobile first and that y'all are using some of you didn't say block rewards, but I think you said network rewards in order to fund refi projects, I think sort of puts this in an interesting niche of blockchain ecosystems. So I'm curious how those distributions of funds for public goods within the ecosystem have gone. And I'd be curious what you're seeing develop as the primary use cases of Celo these days.
Yeah, and I called it epoch rewards, but that's block rewards. So no, totally right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. That's
the
why I
way
couldn't place it. Yeah. Okay.
So kind of with the launch of the network, what we did is we set up the Celo Foundation, and the Celo Foundation, out of the Genesis block, got a big allocation of Celo to fund public goods that are built on Celo. So a lot of open source infrastructure and things that we think people will need as they build sort of different applications that fit with that kind of mission of prosperity for all, and more broadly sort of these kind of themes around regenerative finance. But there's also an on-chain fund, and I think initially when we started out, it was sort of like the design idea was have it be more or less similar size, right? And the on-chain fund works as you would expect, right? People put forward proposals, and I think my connection dropped there for a second. So you have the foundation and you have the on-chain fund, and for the on-chain fund, people put forward proposals. They get discussed on the forum, and then when a proposal is put forward, right, to request that funding, every Celo holder gets to vote, and then that's kind of a way to allocate funding. But also when we put this up, and again, this is like at this point 3 years ago, there weren't too many precedents about successful implementations of that, and we were like, we don't know how this is going to play out, how long is it going to take, and so let's have both sort of an organization, more traditional organization like the Celo Foundation, where there's kind of people managing sort of budgets and like doing grants and in sort of a more traditional way. But let's also have this on-chain way, and then like let's just move and see how those two compare and shake out. And I think what's been exciting to see is sort of really as Celo has grown, there's just been an uptick in activity on the forum, people discussing proposals, and more funding getting allocated that way, to the point where we're at the foundation very actively, I mean, obviously also in collaboration with you guys, right? But are thinking about how do we shift some of the grant program, more towards the, in the hands of the community, and using things like Gitcoin, and other mechanisms. And I think that's really powerful. But again, 3 years ago, the tools just weren't, in our mind, ready. And so we decided on those two parallel mechanisms.
Got it. That's so interesting. I was just sort of curious to see what there's this idea that at least in Ethereum and Bitcoin, in these layer ones, that the people who secure the network, in Bitcoin that's the proof of work miners, in Ethereum it used to be proof of work miners, but now it's proof of stake. There's this idea that you pay for security, the block rewards go for security, but really there's other public goods that are in the ecosystem's best interest to fund. Software development is obviously one that we care about, but I think that the problem has always been that it's really hard to prove that. It's really easy with proof of work to prove that work happened and that you contributed to the security of the network, but with something that's like software development, or it's like the software that I wrote this morning, I'm not even sure it's going to make it to production, and if it does it even provide value to users? Like, it's more abstract whether or not you're actually providing public good to the ecosystem. And so I think that there's been a lot of ecosystems that have been tepid about finding a way to distribute those funding. And so I think that Celo is kind of running ahead of other ecosystems and how it's using those epoch rewards in order to fund the ecosystem. So I think we'll be studying the results of your campaign for some time.
I mean, look, relatedly, I think what you're maybe also hinting a little bit to is this kind of proof of impact concept, right? That's been starting to become more popular, and I think that's I remember my colleague Will Lee at the foundation wrote this blog post. I think this must go back at this point to 2020, maybe even 2019, of sort of theory of change and how do we keep ourselves honest and measure the impact that Celo has in the real world with respect to impact metrics that, I think if you look at them, they may look like things that would show up sort of under sort of the SDGs, for example. And that's something that's really interesting because I think increasingly we're getting the tools to bring off some of that data on chain, right? And I think in the near future we'll have a system that can much more accurately measure impact, and in a way tying that to sort of the funding mechanisms is, I mean, like obviously you've been thinking a lot about this, but that's really powerful. And I think that in a way is kind of the dream state, right, where you have sort of funding for public goods that are tied to this ecosystem be distributed in sort of in a way where it's like, okay, what things will have the most potential future impact, maybe with respect to some of these metrics, or maybe in support of the ecosystem achieving some of these metrics. And, concept of hyperstructures and some of these things just being able to run programmatically, even without humans in the loop, is something that's really appealing. And I'm happy that we're starting to also develop language around this, because I think sometimes some of these concepts can be pretty out there, right? And I remember even early on when in early pitch meetings, we were talking about Charles Eisenstein and natural capital-backed currencies. I mean, people were like, okay, you guys are like, this may happen in 20 years or it may never happen, but, I don't know if this is like something, that you can make meaningful progress to in sort of like a traditional venture cycle. And people wouldn't, this is more like, this is over coffee, right? But then I think what we're seeing is that, as we kind of get crisper on, and I think this is where ReFi Summer or ReFi kind of as a meme is so powerful, right? I think it has provided sort of a way for people to talk about this and break it down and like get more people interested and have really smart people come in, because they see it sort of, they see, oh, there's not just like this project or that project, but there's a connection here, and there's sort of like really a pool of really smart people that are kind of rowing in the same direction. So that's been powerful.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I'd love to sort of pinch and zoom and expand on that. I know that from hanging out at the Celo Saloon at one of your events last summer, that ReFi Summer was a meme. So what is ReFi to y'all, and what is ReFi Summer, and more generally, what kind of ReFi culture and experiments have you seen start to develop around the Celo ecosystem?
Yeah, so to me, ReFi is really goes back to sort of more like the regenerative economics principles, and basically starting from this viewpoint, if money is now technology or software, right, and Ethereum is proven that, then hey, we have a chance to reinvent the financial system. And if we do that, and as we do that, let's do it with was addressing some of the shortcomings that we've seen in the traditional system, specifically with respect to these externalities, especially with focus on the environment, but also communities and financial inclusion, right? That really largely have gone unaddressed, right? And in a way, like the current financial system works kind of in sort of an opposite direction. And so to me, it's really a financial system that has sort of like positive externalities for, say, the environment, right, or for communities. And I think it's most powerful when you kind of overlap in these areas, right? I mean, I think you had Luke on the show recently, and the work he's doing with Collectivo, which really touches on those three pillars. You have, on the one hand, you have massive climate impact, right, by starting to more accurately price natural assets. Starting in Curacao on the island, like coral reefs, food forests. You have the impact on the community in terms of bringing these assets into the community as kind of like utilities, right, and leverage them for like a reserve for community currency. And then you have financial inclusion, because suddenly now people have access to the financial system, and through collectivos, through the broader financial system, right, that previously were left out. And maybe not because they didn't have a bank account, but maybe because they didn't have access to credit, right? And so I think the most powerful project are those that sort of, in a way, like, kind of connect the dots between those. And that's really exciting, because I think that's sort of a glimpse at kind of a new financial system where really we're looking at success very differently than we have to date. And I started my career at Morgan Stanley, and so I'm pretty well versed in sort of traditional financial markets and instruments and all that stuff. And it's certainly it's very clear to me that we're at a point now, 2023, but really sort of our generation, where we have to make some pretty strong pivots as a society if we want to have a planet to live on in sort of generations to come. So to me, this is really the moment, I think, for this movement, right, to test a lot of things, sure, because we're early and some of these things are experimental, but given that this technology is global, I think there's a chance that some of that change can happen a lot faster than many may expect from the outside, that look at these things now and say, oh, it's cute that you have like 100,000 people, I don't know, using some dApp and get permissionless access to loans. But those 100,000 people can grow to 1 billion people in a year or two, and suddenly that's people will kind of pay attention, right? So.
The refi is sort of this interesting space, because I think there's a lot of people that really want to see it work, but they're sort of skeptical that we can build natural backed assets and that we can actually use finance as a tool to heal the environment. And maybe that's just because of hundreds of years of finance externalizing harm. And I guess I'm just wondering, what would you say to someone who's skeptical that crypto can be good for the planet, that finance can be good for the planet? Like, what are the strongest examples of it actually working within the ecosystem that you've seen?
Totally. I mean, I would say, you've experienced it. We were at the Celo Salon. I mean, yeah, come to one of the community events. And I would even say, like, it doesn't have to be like the big kind of conferences, but show up to like a developer meetup in Kenya, right, where people are thinking about sort of kind of a holistic ecosystem, for example, around sustainable agriculture, right? There's projects now. Ethereum just announced they're providing crop insurance, Web3 permissionless crop insurance. There are people in Kenya working on basic financial infrastructure for farmers. There's like really strong on and off ramps. Paychance just announced a feature for easy cash in, cash out, right, to Kenyan shilling, which is really compelling because it also connects to M-Pesa. And so if you're in Kenya today and you have a crypto wallet like Celo wallet, like Valora, for example, you can cash in, cash out from M-Pesa. And more than, almost everyone in Kenya has an M-Pesa wallet. And then you can buy stuff on Nuzo, which I think has about 100,000 people on their platform, and get sort of rewarded in basic in sort of getting sort of like a kind of a rewards program in crypto. But I think that the key thing here is that all of these things are working together in a community and in a way like have an impact, right? Because suddenly we've moved far beyond this. Oh, I have I have a token, I have like, some cryptocurrency and I'm holding it in this wallet and hope that it goes up in value, to no, actually, like, this stuff is all running on blockchain rails, but the actual user couldn't maybe even care less about it, right? They're there for the utility of running their business, or running their farm, accessing insurance, saving, right, making payments to their vendors, taking payments from customers, and I think that's really powerful. And so we're seeing that, and especially seeing the growth in and across Africa. We've recently teamed up with Opera, and they have over 100 million users in Africa, right? And have a wallet that people can now use, sell currencies to pay for airtime, and for example buy stuff on Nuzo. So I think that's really powerful to see these kind of communities spin up, and there's refi embedded in there everywhere, right? From financial inclusion to some of the climate action that people can take. So to me, that's I think, like, just going to one of those meetups and seeing people present and then kind of connecting the dots between those different solutions. That's where I get really optimistic about the future, because some of these are small, but they also just started, and I think um, you know in a few years these could be massive, could be the biggest applications on the continent.
Yeah, I think that the sort of like Cambrian explosion of talent and use cases that have come out of ReFi Summer and just the last market cycle has been really incredible for me. Just the amount of people who see crypto as a wedge for doing good for the world and are starting projects it's inspiring to me, and and I just want to see them scale already, because we have these global coordination failures around biodiversity collapse and climate change and many other things that I just feel like are increasingly urgent. So I'm kind of the mind of which ones of these are going to scale and which ones of these are actually going to be sustainably good. And let's get more and more how do we rotate capital and attention and talent into those projects and do it as fast as possible is sort of where my mind goes.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned two important drivers here, and talent and capital, right? I think we have enough of sort of the early beginnings of something like powerful, right? And there's enough to say to someone smart, "Hey, look at this! Look at what's happening here," for them to kind of see some of the patterns and see the opportunity. And maybe you just personally feel like like, this is good. I mean, you're working on something that has like that will do good in the world if it's successful, right? So it's not too hard to get people motivated to work on this stuff, if they take the time to look at it. And so to me, it's kind of like, other smartest people working on refi products and protocols. And I think the answer is increasingly so, right? And I think that's where the refi and refi summer and like the memes help just draw attention to something that before was just like a bunch of different niches. But then it's the capital too, right? I think if a year ago you would have told me there's a bunch of refi focused venture funds, or even just bigger funds like having refi in sort of their deck to LPs, I would have maybe laughed at you, right? But that's happening, right? I mean, like, there's so many funds now. I mean, you had Jahad from Cerulean on the show. There's Flory Ventures. There's Allegory. There's Davoa. Fred Wilson wrote a post on refi, right? I mean, the team over there has been thinking about climate for like a long time, and obviously is deep in Web3. So I think you have really, I think even sort of among traditional venture, you have quite a few, some of the best investors paying close attention to the space and funding projects even through the winter. I think if I look at Celo kind of ecosystem alone in Q3, Q4 of last year, there's over 100 million in venture capital that sort of I know about, like projects that have raised, right? So that to me is a really strong sign that this is actually happening, because in a way, like, okay, you need the talent, but you also need the capital to then fund sort of the growth of these projects, and especially those that have to build some tech first, right? And especially on the climate side, there's some pretty complicated tech that needs to be built first. It's not just like, hey, let's launch a product and see what happens. So all that makes me hopeful, right? And many of these things are, they're still sort of pre-launch or sort of in beta mode. So I think this year we'll see a bunch of stuff go live that I think will further make people see the potential of this.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a great segue into my next question, which was going to be, what's the outlook for Web3 in 2023 and specifically ReFi in 2023 from your vantage point?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it is kind of this crossing the chasm moment, maybe where I think people have now heard of ReFi. Most people, at least in Web3, I would assume have heard the term and maybe have like could name a few projects. But I I doubt, I think the number of people that have participated, right, is probably still low, and I think uh, there's there's kind of two drivers for that to really kind of change in 2023. One is a lot of kind of the most popular applications in Web3 integrating some refi capability, right? Whether it's a programmatic offset of like on every transaction, or things like stuff that, for example, Spirals is doing with sort of impact staking, and so I think there's kind of like that sort of more um, yeah, project driven adoption in the broader ecosystem, where me as a user, I'm like, oh cool, like I just did this swap on Uniswap, and like there's a small, I check the button for like a small part of that fee to go towards a refi kind of use case. Great, right? I would say yes to that. But then there's also, I think we'll see probably more and more consumer applications that will reward people, for example, for taking climate positive action, right, or for doing good in their communities. And some interesting examples there are um, thinking of, for example, Wheelcoin, which is incentivizing people to. I've been playing with their app for a little bit, to for example, take the bike to work instead of drive, right? Or things like plastics, which is about reducing sort of the use of plastics and kind of doing kind of plastic offsets in a sense, and tying that also to more kind of consumer applications. And so to me, 2023 is probably, at the end of 2023, I would hope that we have millions of people that are actively participating in sort of this refi economy, and that are in a sense then also going out and recruiting their friends to do the same. And I think that can really get to a point where it's kind of like you're in the local store. I'm in Berlin now, and so obviously you have a lot of these organic supermarkets, and it's almost like you feel bad going to just like a Lidl or an Aldi, right? Because like, well, no, you should not buy there, right? You should like everything you should buy should be kind of organic, should be local, and that's great, right? I mean, it's a massive shift in how people think about like the food they buy, and like I think similarly here, I could see this happen with money. It's like, hey, like you have a choice of what financial system to use. So why wouldn't you use the one that benefits the planet, right? And that has sort of these positive externalities for your community. And I think that's I think if we kind of get that sort of mental model shift happening with sort of a broader audience, I think that can be really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of interesting traction that's happening in this space, and like I said, I just want to see it scale. And one of my other hopes for this upcoming cycle is that refi is part of the mainstream story. Right now, I feel like I'm kind of banging the drum in my own little weird corner of Web3 niches. But like, if 2017 was about ICOs and 2020 and 2021 was about DeFi and NFTs, what would have to be true for 2024 or 2025 to be about refi? Or public goods, or crypto being good for the world. And so that's kind of what I would like to see the market cycle be? And by the market cycle be, I mean, we want to rotate attention and capital and momentum into these things because the planet needs it and because our communities need it. And so I'll be really curious to see if we can pull it off, or not. I don't know if you have any sort of comments on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think in a sense let's be honest. FTX has been a setback, right? We've had
Mm,
people, influencers, famous people who have a following who can shape sort of mass opinion, go out there, right, and uh, and endorse it, and I think that's with what's happened. I think created sort of I think it's created a different environment, right? I think if you had someone right now, someone popular say, "Hey, ReFi is really cool. You can do this, and it's crypto or it's Web3." I think people will, "Oh, but wait a second, like, didn't we just, wasn't there just something like bad happening there?" And I've been surprised by people who sort of casually follow how they sort of are distinguishing, and they almost like, hey, but Rene, like this is different from what you guys are doing with sort of permissionless infrastructure. This is like failure of institutions and fraud, and so I've been positively surprised to not have to explain like how FTX is not the same as a Celo to friends and uncles over dinner conversations,
yeah.
but but at the same time, right there, it's still a setback, and so I do wonder what uh, what will be sort of the most effective path to just get the word out. I mean, like our megaphones are just not as big, and so in a way, it has to be more of like a bottoms up type thing, right, where people use one of these cool applications and start telling their friends, and they're convinced them by showing them what it is, what is the impact, right? What does it do? And like I think to me that's yeah, I mean that's a strategy that can work really well, and I think it just takes a little longer. But I mean, we I wasn't like I'm not like if 2023 we don't get there, like give up. No, I mean it's like clear from the beginning that this would be a pretty long journey, and in many ways it's been faster than expected. Right? If you had told me 5 years ago we'd be here, I don't know, I would have not thought that's possible, just in terms of the even just the technical innovations necessary to get here. So I think it's fine that it will take longer. I think it will reward people that will kind of join this on the earlier side, right? Builders, early adopters, um, and and so I think that will kind of create a drive. But I think it's a real test, right? I mean, this stuff has to have real world impact for that to work. Otherwise, my uncle, my cousin is just not gonna like tell their friends about it, right? So I think this is where maybe the bar is higher for us
Yeah.
to ship good products. But if we do, it's also going to be more sustainable growth than it would otherwise be. So I'm seeing 2023 as really a year of like just seeing a lot of these great projects kind of launch, or if they've launched, get to sort of more meaningful adoption. And my hope is too, and we had this kind of I went to a impact investor conference at the end of last year, and we kind of said, hey, like everybody here in the room, like you all manage like billions, tens of billions of dollars. Just start
Mhm.
giving 2% to Web3 impact projects, and here's why. I gave some of the examples, and to my surprise, not everybody just walked out, but people came up after, and like even from some of the very big funds, introduced themselves, and so we started these conversations. And my hope is that as a lot of these smaller projects kind of grow and show progress, show traction, show like impact metrics, right? We also at the same time can develop more of like a kind of capital infrastructure to then support that growth, right? I mean, we have yet to see $100 million investment round into like some impact Web3 project, right? But that's going to happen, right? And when some of
Mhm.
these things start happening, I think that's when that's when you also, I think, you get sort of attention and even more capital, more talent flowing into the space. And so, yeah, I think the answer is we may not get everything we hope for in 2023, but I think we'll make a good step forward. And yeah, it's a year of building.
Nice. Well, I think that's probably a good place to start wrapping up. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to say, Rene?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I mean, one thing maybe just a call out, and I know you sometimes ask folks on who they should have on the show. I really, I mean, a lot of my kind of immediate circle of founders and friends and sort of ReFi are, in the Bay Area or here in Berlin. But I think there's a really big ecosystem out there, especially across Africa, across Latin America, parts of Asia, Southeast Asia. And so I would love to, for us to also make sure those voices are heard and are brought into the conversation. So, and happy to kind of also make some connections there. But I feel like oftentimes I learn the most when I spend time with a founder in a different market and just hearing kind of the on the ground story and like the challenges, right? And like sometimes we're like, okay, what's still needed from a technology perspective, and we're quick to kind of go to sort of the cryptography, but then the actual problem on the ground is just a better on off ramp, right? And like and I think I would love to see more of those voices be brought into the conversation, but then also see more funding go towards some of the basic plumbing, right? Like on and off ramps. And we put a big program forward last year, but it's still moving too slow, right? It's still too expensive to on and off ramp in many markets. And so I think that's kind of a part of the discussion that sometimes maybe gets left out a little bit because it's less sexy, right? Like someone just building like on and off ramps, like, okay, great. But that's really if we ask ourselves what will it take for this to go mainstream, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah, totally. That's great perspective. Well, Rene, if people want to get involved in Celo or ReFi Summer, where should we direct them to online?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We just we actually just went through this. So the website celo.org. We just went through this amazing exercise in the last half year of overhauling our brand and the entire identity, and this was done with the community. A pretty interesting process. Kind of like this concept of like a headless brand and like really having many of the people that are building Celo and have sort of shaped what Celo has become, having a voice in that process. And I love the outcome. And as a founder, I feel like, there's like a sad tear, I'm very attached to the initial brand, but I absolutely love the new brand. And so if you haven't seen that, definitely also for listeners, check that out. So celo.org, chat.celo.org for Discord, and then I'm Regen Rene on Twitter. So feel free to find me there and send me a note. And yeah, always happy to chat to builders and people in the space and investors too. I think we got to bring more money into the space, and we also at the foundation, one of the things we do is help projects connect with investors, and so we that's something especially in 2023 I think is something I'll spend a bunch of time on.
Nice. Well, we will have links in the show notes to those resources so that people can check out Celo. And thanks so much for coming on the GreenPilled Pod.
Thanks, Kevin. Always great to chat with you.
Yeah, likewise.